In August 1944, SS Obergruppenführer Erich von dem Bach-Zelewski, a man who had personally overseen the murder of tens of thousands in anti-partisan operations, stood amid the ruins of Warsaw and declared that Bronislav Kaminsky's men were worse than animals and a disaster for discipline. This wasn't moral outrage, it was professional disgust. The Kaminsky Brigade had committed the unforgivable sin in the SS's eyes. Their brutality was militarily useless. August 1944, Warsaw burns. The city has risen against its Nazi occupiers, and the SS has unleashed hell in response. Among the ruins and flames, SS Obergruppenführer Erich von dem Bach-Zelewski, the man commanding the suppression, watches one particular unit with mounting disgust. His verdict, captured in German after-action reports: Kaminsky's men are worse than animals. They are a disaster for discipline. Let that sink in. This condemnation comes from an SS commander, a man whose entire career was built on ruthless brutality. But here's what you need to understand. Von dem Bach-Zelewski wasn't appalled by what the Kaminsky Brigade was doing to Polish civilians. The SS had no moral threshold. In the Ochota district alone, Rona, the Russian National Liberation Army, also known as the Kaminsky Brigade, would kill an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 Polish civilians during the Warsaw Uprising. Entire apartment blocks were set ablaze with inhabitants trapped inside. Survivor testimony describes orgies of rape and murder, civilians driven into streets, men shot, women violated, buildings torched. The SS had seen all this before. They had done worse themselves. What disgusted von dem Bach-Zelewski wasn't the brutality. It was the chaos, the drunkenness, the fact that while Warsaw burned, Kaminsky's 10,000-man brigade was too busy looting Wehrmacht supply depots to actually fight. German officers reported men arriving without proper uniforms, incapable of sustained combat operations, more interested in stealing than soldiering. This wasn't an army. It was an armed mob masquerading as a military unit. And here's the truly remarkable part. Within days of von dem Bach-Zelewski's complaint, the SS executed Bronislav Kaminsky, their own collaborationist general. They disbanded his entire brigade. In August 1944, with the Eastern Front collapsing, with Germany desperate for every available soldier, the SS made a calculation. This 10,000-man unit, comparable in size to other notorious formations like the Durlwanger Brigade, was worse than useless. They were a liability. Even monsters, it turns out, have standards. Those standards aren't morale, they're operational. The Kaminsky Brigade's crime wasn't being too brutal. It was being incompetent. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, weapons, and doctrine, subscribe now. Turn on notifications and stay tuned for more in-depth World War II analysis. Let's continue. So, who were these men that even the SS couldn't tolerate? The German invasion has shattered the Soviet system across Western Russia. In the Bryansk forests, deep in the occupied Oryol region, a former political prisoner watches the Red Army collapse and sees his moment. His name is Bronislav Kaminsky, Russian engineer, Polish-German descent, Gulag survivor. The kind of man who doesn't believe in ideology. He believes in survival and opportunity. When the Germans arrive, they face a problem. Vast occupied territories, stretched logistics, intense partisan activity in terrain they don't understand. They need local collaborators. In the Bryansk-Oryol region, they find Konstantin Voskoboynik, who establishes the Lokot autonomy, a self-governing collaborationist regime under German oversight. But Voskoboynik dies early in the occupation, and Kaminsky, the opportunist, steps into the vacuum. By late 1941, he's in control. What he builds is extraordinary, not for its brutality, but for its scope. The Lokot autonomy becomes one of the few collaborationist regimes given substantial administrative powers, real powers, schools, courts, currency. This isn't just a puppet government rubber-stamping German orders. It's a genuine self-governing territory administering a population of hundreds of thousands across the Bryansk forests. Kaminsky's stated aims sound almost reasonable: maintaining order, combating Soviet partisans, protecting the local population from chaos. The Germans are happy to let him claim legitimacy, but his actual project is something else entirely. He's not building a government. He's building a personal fiefdom, and every fiefdom needs an army. What emerges is the Russian National Liberation Army, RONA, Kaminsky's personal militia, drawn from Red Army prisoners of war, local anti-Soviet elements. Men motivated not by ideology, but by survival and plunder. The force grows to thousands. German records from this period already note their unreliability and excessive brutality. But the Germans tolerate it. They need the manpower. They need someone to hold this territory while they fight on the front lines. Kaminsky has his title. He has his fiefdom. He has administrative power over a self-governing territory unprecedented in occupied Soviet lands. Now he has an army, 8,000 to 12,000 men at peak strength, poorly trained, under-equipped, held together by coercion and opportunity. What he doesn't yet understand is that he's built something the SS will eventually find intolerable, not because it's brutal, but because it doesn't work. Zoom out from Kaminsky's personal ambition to the impossible arithmetic of conquest. When Operation Barbarossa launched in June 1941, the Wehrmacht and SS sliced through Soviet defenses and immediately confronted a problem of scale that would define the entire Eastern Front. Hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of occupied territory, millions of square miles to control. Regular Soviet forces collapsing, yes. But behind German lines, partisan networks were already forming, sabotaging supply routes, ambushing convoys, turning the rear areas into a second front that bled men and resources the Wehrmacht couldn't spare. The Bryansk-Oryol region where Kaminsky operated was partisan country. Dense forests, difficult terrain, hostile populations, logistical nightmares. German forces were stretched impossibly thin. Every soldier guarding a village or escorting a supply column was a soldier not fighting at the front. The math was brutal and simple. Germany didn't have enough men to occupy what it had conquered. Enter the collaborators, not out of ideological kinship. The Nazi leadership despised Slavs as subhuman, but cold pragmatism demanded local auxiliaries who knew the terrain, spoke the language, could identify partisan sympathizers. They were force multipliers doing the dirty work of occupation while German units pushed deeper into Soviet territory. The strategic objective was clear: supplement occupation, forces, suppress partisans, free up Wehrmacht and SS troops for frontline duties. The man overseeing this devil's bargain in Army Group Center's rear areas was General Max von Schenkendorf, responsible for security operations across vast swaths of occupied Russia. He directly supervised the relationship with the Lokot autonomy, watched as Kaminsky transformed administrative authority into military power. The Germans provided weapons, logistical support, and most crucially, legitimacy. In exchange, Kaminsky's militia would handle anti-partisan operations, maintain order, keep the region pacified. The Germans already had complaints. Reports noted unreliability and excessive brutality during early anti-partisan sweeps. But complaints weren't enough to matter. Not yet. Germany needed bodies to hold territory. Kaminsky needed German backing to maintain power. What kind of army was Rona, really? That question would be answered in blood, in destroyed villages, in the systematic brutalization of occupied populations, and eventually in the streets of Warsaw, where even the SS would find their answer intolerable. Picture this: a Soviet T-34 tank rumbling through occupied territory. A German cross hastily painted over the red star in whitewash that's already flaking off. German sentries see it, hesitate. Is it ours or theirs? And sometimes they open fire on their own side. This was Rona's signature. Improvised, chaotic, dangerous to everyone, including the Germans who armed them. The numbers looked impressive on paper. At peak strength in late 1943, the Russian National Liberation Army commanded between 8,000 and 12,000 men. Larger than most auxiliary police battalions that numbered a few hundred, comparable even to the infamous Derlewanger Brigade's 4,000 to 6,000. But numbers meant nothing without discipline, and discipline was exactly what Rona lacked. Their equipment told the real story. Small arms, yes. Rifles and submachine guns looted from Soviet stockpiles, machine guns, mortars, some captured artillery, a handful of those repainted tanks and armored cars that kept causing friendly fire incidents. And for logistics, requisitioned civilian vehicles, horses, whatever they could steal. No proper supply chain, no spare parts, no fuel reserves. German records noted chronic shortages of ammunition, food, and basic military necessities throughout Rona's existence. As for combat effectiveness, German after-action reports were damning from the start. They rated Rona extremely low in discipline, training, and morale. High desertion rates, little unit cohesion. These weren't soldiers. They were armed men in military-style formations. There's a crucial difference. Who were these men? The rank and file came from the wreckage of Soviet collapse. Former Red Army prisoners who'd take any escape from German camps. Local anti-Soviet elements nursing old grudges. Opportunists who saw collaboration as survival. Very few genuine ideologues. Mostly men motivated by staying alive and whatever they could plunder along the way. Soviet post-war interrogations of captured fighters confirmed it. This was a force held together by coercion and opportunity, not belief. This was the force Kaminsky commanded. Thousands of poorly trained men with captured weapons painted in enemy colors. No real military discipline, no ideological coherence, just violence and the promise of loot. The Germans had already documented their problems, but Germany needed bodies to hold territory, and Kaminsky needed German backing to maintain power. So they set them loose on the civilian population. What followed was predictable. A village in the Bryansk forests, winter 1942. The warning comes from the tree line, riders approaching. By the time families can react, Rona soldiers are already in the streets. What follows isn't a military operation. It's organized pillage. Soviet post-war investigations would document this pattern across at least 200 villages from 1942 to 1943. The methodology was consistent. Summary executions of suspected partisan sympathizers, which could mean anyone. Then systematic looting. Then the burning. Several thousand civilians died in these operations. The exact number will never be known. Many villages simply ceased to exist. For the people trapped in Rona's operational zone, The collaborationist militia represented something worse than German occupation. The Germans at least operated with some predictability. Rona's presence meant arbitrary violence, forced labor requisitions, the constant threat of mass reprisals. A neighbor's denunciation could bring Kaminsky's men to your door. Resistance meant collective punishment. Entire families shot, homes torched, livestock confiscated. This was anti-partisan warfare as license for terror and plunder. But here's what the German complaints focused on: military ineffectiveness, not civilian deaths. The violence often alienated the very populations the Germans hoped to pacify. When you burn a village to punish partisan collaboration, you create more partisans. When Rona soldiers arrived drunk, looted indiscriminately, and left civilians with nothing, they were undermining German strategic interests in the occupied territories. The problem wasn't that Rona killed thousands. The SS had no objection to mass killing. The problem was that they were terrible at their primary mission. They couldn't suppress the partisans. They couldn't hold territory effectively. They were consuming resources and generating resentment while delivering minimal tactical value. The Lokot autonomy functioned as Kaminsky's personal fiefdom, with Rona as his instrument of control. He maintained schools and courts, created local currency, gave his regime the appearance of legitimate self-governance. But beneath that facade was a protection racket. Collaborate or face the same fate as those 200 villages. For 2 years, this pattern continued. Rona terrorized the countryside. The Germans tolerated it as long as they remained useful. Supply shortages, chronic indiscipline, high desertion rates, all noted, all ignored. But in 1944, everything changed. The Red Army was coming, advancing relentlessly westward, and Kaminsky's little kingdom in the Bryansk forests was about to collapse. Winter 1944. The Red Army steamrolled westward, and with it came the death sentence for Kaminsky's little empire, the Lokot autonomy. 2 years of terror disguised as self-governance collapsed in a matter of weeks. Rona fled ahead of Soviet forces, abandoning the Bryansk forests, the 200 destroyed villages, the thousands of dead civilians left in their wake. Kaminsky's fiefdom was gone. But Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, had a problem. The Eastern Front was hemorrhaging German manpower faster than replacements could arrive. Partisan warfare still raged across occupied territories. And here came 10,000 Russian collaborators with a reputation for ruthlessness, fleeing westward, desperately seeking German protection. Himmler made his calculation: absorb them. In 1944, the Russian National Liberation Army was formally integrated into the Waffen-SS as SS Sturm Brigade Rona. Kaminsky, former Gulag prisoner, engineer turned warlord, received promotion to Waffen-Brigadeführer der SS, an SS general, collar tabs with oak leaves, command of a brigade bearing the SS runes. This was a remarkable elevation for any collaborationist commander, let alone one whose unit German records already described as unreliable and excessively brutal. But desperation breeds strange alliances. The SS needed bodies. Kaminsky needed legitimacy and resources. On paper, it looked like a marriage of mutual benefit. The reality was far more complicated. For the first time in Rona's existence, they fell under direct SS observation and professional German command structure. No more operating semi-independently in the Bryansk forests, where their chronic supply shortages, rampant looting, and high desertion rates could be quietly documented but largely ignored. Now they would answer to SS officers who expected military discipline, combat effectiveness, operational results. The German overseers quickly discovered what their after-action reports had been noting for 2 years. Rona wasn't a military unit. They were armed bandits with a command structure, poor training, worse discipline, motivated primarily by plunder rather than any coherent military or ideological objective. Their equipment remained a chaotic mix of captured Soviet weapons and improvised logistics. Many men still lacked proper uniforms. Kaminsky now wore the collar tabs of an SS general. His brigade bore the SS runes. But this promotion came with a price: scrutiny. The marriage of convenience was about to become a trial by fire. Rona was about to be tested in the most brutal urban combat of the war, Warsaw, and everything the Germans had tolerated in the forests would become impossible to ignore in the streets. Warsaw, August 1st, 1944. The Polish Home Army rose against their German occupiers, barricades thrown up across streets, red and white flags unfurling from rooftops. Tens of thousands of resistance fighters betting everything on liberation. Soviet forces were approaching from the east. The moment seemed right, but the Poles didn't know what was coming for them. The Germans saw the uprising as both a military emergency and a political catastrophe. They needed to crush it quickly and brutally, a message written in blood that would echo across occupied Europe. They needed it done by specialists in terror. SS Obergruppenführer Erich von dem Bach-Zelewski got the assignment. A veteran of anti-partisan warfare who had overseen mass killings across the Eastern Front. He understood the mission perfectly: break the city's will before the Soviets arrived. And he knew exactly which units to call. He ordered in the monsters. The Derlewanger Brigade, 4,000 to 6,000 convicted criminals pulled from concentration camps and prisons, commanded by Oskar Derlewanger, a sadist with convictions for child molestation. They had a reputation for making atrocities into an art form, and alongside them, Rona, Kaminsky's brigade, now bearing SS runes and integrated into the Waffen SS command structure. 8,000 to 10,000 men strong, the same unit that had left 200 destroyed villages across the Bryansk forests. The same collaborators whose unreliability and excessive brutality had already filled German after-action reports. This wasn't an accident. Von dem Bach-Zelewski wanted units with reputations for ruthlessness, units that would terrorize civilians into submission, units that wouldn't hesitate when ordered to execute entire city blocks. What he didn't fully grasp, what nobody in the German command quite understood yet, was that there's a difference between calculated terror and complete chaos, between brutality as a weapon and brutality as an end in itself. The Germans were sending in forces they expected would commit atrocities. That was the point. What they didn't expect was that these forces would become so obsessed with plunder, so consumed by drunken rampages and systematic looting, that they would cease to function as military units at all. The stage was set. The Poles were dug in, armed and determined. The Germans sent in their monsters. Rona was unleashed on the Ochota district. What happened next shocked even the SS. They drove us out into the street, shot the men, raped the women, and set the building on fire. A Polish survivor's testimony preserved in the Warsaw Uprising Museum. One voice among thousands describing what happened when Rona entered the Ochota district in August 1944. This wasn't combat. This was a criminal rampage on a massive scale. Polish eyewitnesses described orgies of rape and murder. Entire apartment blocks set ablaze with inhabitants still trapped inside. Families driven into streets and executed. Systematic sexual violence that continued for days. The estimates are staggering. between 5 and 10,000 Polish civilians killed by Rona in Ochota alone, not in weeks of fighting, in days of uncontrolled savagery. But here's what makes this more than just another atrocity in a war full of them. Rona wasn't just brutalizing civilians. They were failing their actual military mission. German after-action reports documented the problem with brutal clarity. While Polish resistance fighters held their positions behind barricades, while the Home Army maintained organized defensive lines, Rona soldiers were looting houses. They were stealing from Wehrmacht supply depots, literally robbing their own side's ammunition and equipment stores. They arrived in Warsaw poorly equipped, many lacking proper uniforms. And instead of fighting to secure those supplies through military channels, they just stole them. Von Dembach-Zelewski's forces were supposed to be crushing an armed uprising. Instead, they got a drunken mob more interested in plunder than combat. The tactical failure was absolute. The Ochota district burned, yes. Thousands lay dead in the streets and in the smoking ruins of apartment buildings. The horror was real and documented and undeniable. But the Polish resistance was still fighting, still holding their positions, still organized, still armed, still defiant. Rona had massacred thousands of civilians while accomplishing virtually nothing of military value. They had terrorized a neighborhood, filled mass graves, and left the actual enemy, the armed Polish fighters, largely intact. The German commanders were furious, not at the killing. Mass civilian casualties were expected, even desired as a terror tactic. They were furious at the failure, at the incompetence, at a 10,000-man brigade that had proven more interested in rape and theft than in actually defeating the enemy. In the cold calculus of SS operations, Rona had committed the one unforgivable sin. They were useless. Picture the scene. German officers surveying the Ochota district in August 1944. Bodies in the streets, buildings still smoldering, and everywhere, Rona soldiers drunk, staggering under the weight of stolen goods, loaded down with furniture, jewelry, bottles of looted alcohol. While behind them, the Polish positions they were supposed to capture still holding. The after-action reports came in like indictments. German commanders documented uncontrollable looting and brutality. But notice what they're condemning, not the brutality itself. The SS had no moral threshold. They were condemning the chaos, the incompetence, the complete failure to accomplish military objectives. General Heinz Guderian called them miserable scoundrels. SS Obergruppenführer von Dembach-Zelewski, the man leading the Warsaw Suppression, a veteran of mass killings across the Eastern Front, reportedly stated that Kaminsky's men are worse than animals. They are a disaster for discipline. Read that again. A disaster for discipline. Not a moral abomination. Not too brutal, even for us. A disaster for discipline. The specific complaints painted a damning picture. Rona was stealing from Wehrmacht supply depots, actively undermining German logistics while German soldiers fought and died. They had arrived in Warsaw poorly equipped, many lacking proper uniforms, dependent on captured Soviet weapons that were already falling apart. German officers noted they were incapable of sustained combat operations. The moment resistance stiffened, Rona broke and ran, unless there was something to steal. This was the ultimate sin in SS calculus. The brutality was expected, desired even. Terror was the point. But Rona's behavior wasn't just immoral, it was militarily counterproductive. They consumed German resources. They undermined discipline among other units. Why follow orders when the Russians next to you are getting rich? Looting? They failed to accomplish combat objectives. They left Polish fighters intact while Rona got drunk on looted vodka. The verdict was in. This wasn't a military unit. This was a mob in stolen uniforms, a 10,000-man criminal enterprise that happened to carry German weapons. Kaminsky had promised Himmler a brigade. He delivered bandits. And in the ruthlessly pragmatic SS system, where operational efficiency was the only morality that mattered, that was a death sentence. The only question was how to carry it out. August 1944. A summons arrives for Bronislav Kaminsky. Report to Łódź immediately for a conference with senior SS leadership. On the surface, nothing unusual. Commanders were frequently recalled for briefings, especially with the Eastern Front collapsing and Germany's situation growing desperate. But did Kaminsky suspect? Did he notice the tone of the message, the unusual timing, the fact that he was being pulled from Warsaw mid-operation? We'll never know what went through his mind as he traveled to Łódź. Whether he walked into that room confident in his position as Waffen-Brigadeführer der SS, or whether some instinct warned him this conference was different. What we do know is what happened next. Kaminsky faced an SS court-martial. The charges: looting and failing to control his men. The same complaints that had filled German after-action reports for weeks. The stolen Wehrmacht supplies, the drunken rampages, the complete breakdown of military discipline. But now those complaints had consequences. The execution came swiftly, remarkably swift in fact. No lengthy trial, no appeals, no time for Kaminsky to mount a defense or call in favors from his SS patrons. One meeting, one verdict, one bullet. In August 1944, Bronislav Kaminsky, former Gulag prisoner, former head of the Lokot autonomy, Waffen-Brigadeführer der SS, was shot by his own German masters. The speed tells you everything about how urgent the SS considered this problem. This wasn't justice, it was elimination. A failed asset being liquidated with the same cold efficiency the SS applied to everything else. But executing Kaminsky created a new problem. His brigade, 10,000 armed men who had just lost their commander. Men who had followed Kaminsky from the Bryansk forests to Warsaw, who had sworn loyalty to him personally, not to Germany or the SS. So the SS crafted a cover story. The official explanation fed to Rona troops. Kaminsky was killed by Polish partisans. An ambush. A hero's death fighting the enemies of the Reich. It was a calculated lie designed to prevent unit collapse. To maintain the fiction, already threadbare, that the SS and their collaborators were partners in a shared cause. To keep 10,000 armed men from panicking, deserting, or worse, turning their weapons on their German handlers. Kaminsky was dead. The cover-up was in place. But the SS still had to deal with his brigade. The lie held, barely. Rona troops, told their commander had fallen to Polish partisans, were stunned and leaderless. Their already fragile morale shattered. But the SS wasn't taking chances. Within days of Kaminsky's execution, German troops moved to disarm the brigade. Picture the scene. The men who had terrorized Ochota, who had burned apartment blocks and murdered thousands, now standing in formation as Wehrmacht soldiers confiscated their weapons. The hunters had become the helpless. The SS had solved its Rona problem with characteristic efficiency. The brigade that once numbered 10,000 men simply ceased to exist as a fighting force. What remained was scattered, absorbed, erased. Remnants were folded into other collaborationist formations, notably Vlasov's Russian Liberation Army, the ROA, which operated under entirely different principles. And here's where Rona's unique infamy becomes clear. Vlasov's forces, whatever their moral compromises, sought legitimacy as an anti-Bolshevik military organization. They avoided direct involvement in the worst atrocities, maintained military discipline, aspired to be treated as a proper army. Rona had no such pretensions. From the Lokot autonomy through Warsaw, they existed exclusively for punitive operations. Village burnings, anti-partisan sweeps, urban terror. In the entire hierarchy of German collaborationist forces, only one unit matched their reputation for undisciplined brutality. The Durlawanger Brigade, composed of convicted criminals and commanded by a sadist. That was Rona's peer group. That was their legacy. Their fate was sealed the moment Kaminsky died. Some former Rona members were executed by the Germans for specific crimes. Others deserted, melting into the chaos of the collapsing Eastern Front. Those absorbed into other units found themselves marked. Their service with Rona, a stain that would follow them into Soviet captivity and post-war trials. There would be no rehabilitation, no reframing of their story.